Hi, welcome to episode 29 of Talk About the Passion, The Power to Believe. The title of this episode comes from the title of a King Crimson record from 2003. It's a great record, and the title, as well as the song title Happy with What You Have to Be Happy With, are both interchangeable for this one. To be completely honest, the only reason I didn't name it Happy with What You Have to Be Happy With is because it wouldn't fit on the little JPEG ad thing I make to promote each episode. But you can use both of these titles. I think they work for the conversation. My guest today is Coleman Rogers. Coleman is a photographer from Massachusetts. If you're tapped into the Boston music scene right now, you'll probably see a lot of his photographs. He's shooting constantly. I had the pleasure of meeting him briefly at the Jerry's Kids final show a couple of months back. We talk a bit about that show in this episode, actually. As you'll hear in the episode, though, Coleman is more than a photographer. He talks about growing up around Detroit, and as well as his years working in recording studios, all the while, being this innovative and driven guy that, he just talks with great passion about the recording process and his life in that world. It's pretty cool. We get into a little bit about a accident Coleman got into on his bicycle that almost killed him. And, this is a great episode, and it was my first conversation I had with someone after taking a few months off to sort of regroup. Coleman invited me up to his place where we recorded this, and then we headed over to this excellent place called Uncharted, which is a great little spot in Lowell that has a lot of great shows, local bands, as well as some bigger shows. I think I saw Evan Dando is playing there soon, if you're into that. Coleman was a great guest, and I was happy to hang out with him. He, exudes passion, as I just said, and you'll hear in this long conversation. A couple more things, and we'll get going here. I'm on social media, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Instagram and Facebook are probably my favorite places to post, and I try to keep both of them pretty current with content, even between new episodes. A lot of times I try to put... if there's any visual stuff that goes along with the conversation, like maybe photographs from a certain show or that kind of thing, I may put them up randomly here and there or attached to the actual show. Same goes with where you can hear the podcast. I'm on iTunes, Google Play, even Spotify now. If you'd like to be on an episode or know someone who should, or have an idea for an episode that's, not one of these straightforward sort of biographical conversations, let's talk. Send me a message at, one of those social media sites, and we'll get something happening. Anyway, I'll stop talking. Here is episode 29, The Power to Believe. Thanks for listening. I'm here with Coleman Rogers, and how are you doing today?
I'm doing okay. We were talking before this, and the little recorder you have, I saw red lights on it. When I was a recording engineer, I had the AIR theory, which is always in record.
Oh, okay.
So if I could record, I always had tape rolling just to catch moments. So when I saw we were having a conversation before this, I was
that is something I was thinking of doing. It's like sort of, and then because some podcasts I've heard where they kind of fade in a conversation.
Sure.
So, but
But I'm doing fine. I mean, it's been a good day.
Yeah, good. Thanks for doing this for me. Like I said, this is the first one I've done in a few months, so I definitely appreciate it. And
you're welcome. I was thrilled to be that you asked me, and happy to be doing it with you.
Cool. So where did you grow up, Coleman?
I grew up just outside of Detroit in a suburb called Grosse Pointe. Mm-hmm. Most people probably know it from the movie Grosse Pointe Blank, just the name anyway.
Right.
And starting in sixth grade, I was in a private school, very small classes, and finished there in 1979. Graduated from high school, and left.
Yeah. What kind of town was Grosse Pointe?
Oh, it's a wealthy suburb.
Yeah. Okay.
A lot of the car executives lived there.
Right.
Right on the water, we had things like the Henry Ford Mansion.
Oh wow.
There were some huge estates right on Lake St. Clair,
Right.
along Lakeshore Drive there. But like any other place, it has boring things, and
Right.
some interesting things. I was happy to be at this school because it was good intellectually, but there were also like I took a mechanics course, so I took a car engine apart and put it back together. It was supposed to be a year-long course.
Right.
I had the engine back together again and running it by Thanksgiving.
Oh, nice.
And the instructor. So that was one of the first things for me of, wow, you can actually, I know what to do with my hands.
Yeah.
And I have a good feel for how things work mechanically.
Right.
But there was also a good opportunity there for creativity, especially in high school. There was a theater program, and the director of the theater program really got the school to invest a lot in the theater itself and the program, and so we put on some great plays. I was part of musicals 3 years in a row.
Oh wow!
When I was a sophomore, I was in Guys and Dolls. Let's see, junior, I think was Godspell, and then senior year was a Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Forum.
Oh, nice.
And so I had small parts.
Yeah.
But I sang.
Right.
Back then. I was pretty okay musically.
Yeah.
But it was nice to have that kind of creativity nurtured.
Right. Yeah.
In a way.
And how did you? Is that where you sort of got into that through school, or was there your family into musicals or that kind of thing?
My grandmother was a singer. She sang opera for quite a few years until she really started having kids, and then she gave it up. But it was always something that was known kind of in our family that she sang. And my uncle played violin. One of my aunts sang semi-professionally out in Colorado. And my mom and dad both enjoyed singing in local choruses and things like that. So I tried playing guitar. I didn't have back then I didn't have the mentality to really sit and practice.
Right.
And I was way too scattered to ever sit and concentrate on anything like
Right.
that for long enough. If it didn't come easily to me, forget it. I wasn't about to do it.
Yeah.
As much as fun as it looked, and
Yeah.
as much as I kind of thought maybe that'd be really cool, I just never did it.
Right. Who were some of your first musical people you got into as a child?
I'd say Elton John was probably one of the first people that I really latched onto musically and bought a lot of records and listened to them over and over again.
Yeah.
The production, his songwriting, his singing.
Oh yeah.
Everything, the whole drama of his shows. That was the first concert I saw was Elton John, probably in like 1976 or 1977. Back, and they were amazing shows.
That would have been like Captain Fantastic era, maybe.
I think so. Yeah. I mean, I just remember him coming out every 2 or 3 songs with a different
outfit,
like ridiculous set of glasses and outfit, and different pianos with all the decorations in the pianos. It was a pretty intense kind of show.
Nice.
So that he was probably the first one that I really latched onto in a big way that I remember now. I mean, there were a lot of other rock bands, Led Zeppelin, Aerosmith, the big the Who, the classic ones that I really enjoyed. But I'd say Elton John was the first one I kind of came preoccupied with.
Yeah.
Sang all his songs along with knew all the lyrics and everything.
And then photography. When did that come into your life?
I think when I was about 14 or 15, I visited a cousin's family out in Colorado, and one of my older cousins was into photography and had a dark room, and I was really fascinated by the idea, not just of the images and capturing things, but the process of the whole thing. The mechanism of the camera, and then you mix up these chemicals and suddenly you have this thing that appears. So you're really covering a wide range of interesting things there with just doing one thing. So I came back from a vacation and had a long talk with my dad, I remember, and he gave me Zeiss Icoflex, which is a twin lens reflex camera that he had bought in 1950 on my mom and dad's honeymoon in France, and we slowly put together a darkroom for me in the house.
Oh,
so
nice.
I had a section, a little room in the basement where I didn't have running water in that room, but I could, I could set up some trays and I could develop film and do some printing of my own. I was part of the yearbook for the junior and senior year.
Right.
So I took a lot of photos, more of people around school and things like that. I didn't really think of myself as an artist, at that point, but really fascinated with the process.
Yeah, and you just showed me that actual camera. Do you have photos still from that era of your life, or negatives?
No. My mom and dad. I'm sure it was my mom.
Yeah,
I love her to pieces. She's 90. I went off to college. And then I went to Brown University, came home. I took 5 years to get through school.
Yeah.
Came home. I was home for the summer after school, trying to find a job in Detroit in recording studios. Didn't go well.
Right.
And in the fall of 1984, I don't mean to jump ahead. It's part of the story. Okay. In the fall of 84, I got a call from a friend here in Boston who offered me a job here in a little recording studio in Brighton.
Okay.
And I packed up and moved out.
Nice.
And I don't remember taking all my darkroom stuff with me. And years later, I remembered that I had it. I didn't really do photography through college very much. And I have no idea what happened to all my books of negatives. And I have a feeling my mom probably said, this is all bullshit, and threw it away.
Yeah.
So it's really sad. I actually do have some prints. One of the things I really enjoyed doing was photographing dress rehearsals for the theater.
Okay. And
I guess that's where I get my love for shooting, live music in a dark environment up on a stage. Because, every play, I was the one in charge of shooting photos of the play.
Nice.
And so I think I have somewhere in a box around here, I've got prints, 8x10 prints of probably more outtakes than anything.
Right.
People being wacky on the stage. But I don't have the negatives. I wish I did. I can't find them anywhere.
Nice.
So.
And so is that how you made your way to Massachusetts from...
Yes, exactly. I went to school in Providence.
Yeah.
And while I was in school at Providence, I went to school to study mechanical engineering.
Okay.
I really had a love for alternative energy. And when I went to school, Jimmy Carter was still president. Yeah. And he was really making a big push for investing in alternative energy, solar power, thermal, all the basically everything.
Yeah.
And so, I struggled with some of the engineering classes, but I was moving my way through and really getting excited. It all makes sense if you look at my whole career arc. One of the professors who was my advisor had a lot of lab experiments he was doing. And so even though I didn't do great in his classes, I worked with him in the lab and was kind of like a student assistant to his grad students. Okay. And so I remember going and being in meetings with the grad students and him, and they were talking about theories and they were developing these long equations on the board. And I was really felt much more comfortable with my hands-on in the lab equipment itself.
Right. Yeah.
So I would say junior year, we started doing career counseling stuff and looking at where I might get placed.
Right.
And I started talking about, wanting to go into alternative energy. And at that point, Reagan had been president probably for 2 years. And it only took him a little while to pretty much pull the plug on everything Jimmy Carter had done. Yeah. And was ramping up all the defense and starting to, getting going with essentially the war race, the arms race with Russia and the Soviet Union at that point. So all the career advice I was getting was, well, you're going to end up in working on defense. Right. And so I kind of had some panic attacks about that,
Right, yeah.
not wanting to do that.
Yeah, of course.
And so I took a step back and started taking some classes in more creative things. Like I took semiotics and I took electronic music.
Oh, wow.
We had a great electronic music program at Brown University. And I felt very at home in the recording studio and with the synthesizers and tape machines there. You know, I went to college. I had a little Tascam 4-track cassette deck. It was the 122, Tascam Porta Studio.
Yeah.
It was a huge thing at that point.
Oh, yeah.
And I had I still have it actually, the Sequential Circuits Pro 1.
Oh, yeah.
It was like the Sequential Circuits knockoff of a Moog.
Right.
And I tried to sing in bands and stuff, and I didn't have the confidence really to do it. But I did mess around with that, and I played with bands and started actually doing sound in college a little bit for a couple of bands, and it really resonated with me working on electronic music and being in a recording studio. My would have been my fifth year, my second senior year. I was one of the student advisors in the recording studio. So we had somebody from a local recording studio who was a tech, and he would come in once a week, and we would, go over all the equipment. And so I was with him pretty much all the time when he would come in, and learned, some ideas about wiring and, equipment maintenance, taking things apart and what you're going to look at.
That kind of stuff.
So at graduation, I thought, hey, I'm just going to go home to Detroit. Motown. I'm going to get a job in a recording studio. It's going to be great. And I went around the city and knocked on doors and got looks like, what are you doing here? I had no experience. In an actual recording studio. All I had was experience as a student. And so I ended up starting training for computer sales.
Okay.
And this is in 1984 when computers were not easy to work with. And the band I was in at Brown, we were called The Motion.
Okay.
And we had recorded with one of somebody who was a year or two ahead of us at Brown who had come here to Boston. We had done some recordings with him here in Boston at a little studio called Splice of Life.
Okay.
In the basement of a house in Brighton, right near St. Elizabeth's Hospital.
Oh, wow.
Some people might remember the name. So I had called him, as things weren't going well in Detroit. I reached out to Dave Zuckerman and said, any work out there? I'd love to come out. Anything going on? And he said, well, not at this time. And it was probably in the middle of August of 1984. He called and said that his studio manager was leaving and he was looking for somebody to come take her place. And would I be interested in moving? So I packed up all my stuff from Detroit and came here to Boston.
Oh, wow.
And I was managing the studio schedule, and I handled cassette duplication. Which, remember cassette duplication? We had...
high-speed dubbing?
No. We had Nakamichi BX1s. Crap, I forget the model number of the cassette deck, but they were all matched cassette decks. And we had an Otari half-track, reel-to-reel that we would play masters from. And, we did, I think, 6 or 8 cassettes all at once.
Oh, wow.
One of my first technical projects working there was I built a remote control that tied all of the cassette decks together so that I had one button to hit
push,
to start them all instead of as quick as I could hitting all the play buttons.
So
and then hitting the reel-to-reel, I could start all of them at once at the same time.
That's awesome.
So that was like my first step into the world of recording studios. I lived in the house upstairs from the studio.
Oh, wow.
And so I was pretty much assisting any sessions I could to learn, what was going on.
What kind of music was coming in and out of there?
It was a real mix of things. We did a lot of singer-songwriter folk music. We did, rock and roll. and we had some blues. We had some outside engineers who came in. Rich Mendelson, who teaches at Berkeley, I think still.
Yeah.
He came in. He brought Ronnie Earl's band in back then.
Nice.
And those were some amazing sessions. Those guys could play.
Yeah.
They would. We had a Leslie there, so they didn't have to bring the Leslie in.
Yeah.
But those guys would come in and book out like a week.
Yeah.
And the music coming out of that was just unbelievable hearing the stuff they played.
Nice.
So for me as like a 23, 24-year-old kid, assisting in a little studio and hearing those guys was just amazing.
Yeah, nice.
One of the first sessions I did on my own as an engineer, I worked with Eric Kilburn. And Eric is known around town now as being the owner of Wellspring Sound out in Acton.
Okay.
But he and I are really good friends.
Yeah.
He was my first session, and as he started buying equipment and setting up his own little recording studio, I would go over and set things up with him and then do some recordings when he was playing.
Yeah.
I was basically his engineer at his place when he was playing. And so that kind of started me reaching out a little bit from only working and being staff at that one place. And I'd say maybe a year or two after I came to Boston, Splice of Life got sold. And the woman who bought it, she wanted to completely re-outfit the studio with equipment.
Right.
And so we brought in one or two people to consult and talk. I learned how to do wireless. I learned. I kind of knew how to do some soldering and connectorizing and things. When you're managing a studio, you got to learn how to fix headphones really fast because headphones break all the time. So it was really my first diving into how to solve ground loops, how to interface. And in 1984 and 5, it was kind of the beginning of prosumer equipment, where you had some equipment that operated at +4 operating level, but was unbalanced.
Okay.
Electrically unbalanced.
Right.
And some of it was -10 unbalanced and had RCAs, but it was being sold as professional. So trying to interface these things was really a challenge, and get everything quiet.
Right.
But it's really where I got my feet wet in sitting at a desk with a crimp tool in my hand and a soldering station, and my first addiction to solder flux, and really just spending days and days soldering connectors and shrink tubing and labeling and then slowly plugging the whole thing together and troubleshooting it and making it all work.
Having to improvise sometimes.
Yeah, you do, because the manual will say one thing, but it doesn't work quite right. And then you've got some possibilities to try and, you stop when it's quiet. So, I was at Splice of Life, I think it was about 3 years. And then I made contact with Paul Caruso. Now, Paul was... he was on the South Shore down in Rockland.
Okay.
He played drums in the Atlantics for a long time.
Yeah.
He's since passed away, unfortunately. It's too soon.
Right.
He was a wonderful, wonderful guy.
Yep.
But he had at that point it was a 16-track studio in his house in Rockland. It was zoned properly. I mean, it was kind of like right on the water.
Right.
And somehow I don't know how the zoning worked, but it was really like the whole basement of his house.
Oh wow.
There was a separate door going down right to the water.
Oh, wow.
He had Mike Blackmer come in. I don't know if you know the name Mike Blackmer. No. Michael is someone who's been a recording studio tech and studio designer around this area for probably 40 years, 45, 50 years. I mean, he was the Cars main tech at Synchro Sound for a long, long time. He's the son of Dave Blackmer of DBX fame.
Right.
So he grew up,
around that stuff.
So I met him when I started working there because Paul wanted to turn over the 16-track studio to be a 24-track studio.
Right.
And he worked a deal with the guys who had bought Synchro Sound to buy the console and tape machine. It was an MCI 636 automated console and a JH24 2-inch tape machine. And so, I got another round of schooling working with Mike Blackmer in rewiring the whole studio, making it work, and then the idea of like popping modules out, sticking them in an extender, and doing some troubleshooting and poking around. Nice. And that MCI needed a lot of love and care. Yeah. The joke about MCI is that it stands for munchy, crunchy, and intermittent. And so you had to really learn how to use that console on a day-to-day basis because it needed a lot of
care.
You kind of had to handle it with gentle force. Yeah. Anytime I would need to throw a switch, I would throw the switch 5 and 6 times because you had to kind of exercise the switch to clear the oxide off the switch so it would be quiet. Yeah. So I was kind of the staff engineer there for, 2 or 3 years. And a lot of the clients that I had at Splice of Life and that I had worked with, even doing live sound and met various places, all said they would come down and work with me at Bay Farm. Right. It was what it was called, Bay Farm Sound Studio. Okay. And very few did. Yeah. I worked long days, and it was a long drive to get down there. Yeah. So, and I even forget who started me doing it, but somebody said, we'd love to work with you, but we don't want to come down there. Is there anything we could do at a different studio? Right. And I think by 2 or 3 years into me being at Bay Farm, somebody else had bought Splice of Life. Right. And moved it to a studio kind of behind the Arsenal Mall in Watertown. And so I did some freelance work there, and probably around that time I had started buying my own microphones and mic preamps as things would show up and seem like an interesting deal. Right. So I bought. I still have them around somewhere. A friend of mine's been using a lot of this. A lot of my recording gear. I've got some beautiful Neumanns, some Neve, and Telefunken the Telefunken V72s are real sweeties. Yeah. I bought those, but no one really knew what they were. Right. And they're really wonderful. So I had some of my own recording equipment, and I started doing more freelance work. I could go into pretty much any studio with my own mics and mic preamps, and suddenly turn their studio into a great recording environment because I had such great front end stuff. So I would go microphone, and I even had my own snakes that I built. I made of Canary, beautiful Canary Starquad. I would run them underneath the doors and up to my mic pre's, and then I would jack around and go directly into the tape machine. And so pretty much the whole front end was all my front end. And it really made a huge difference in how the recording sounded. Yeah, I bet. And, I started doing more freelance work around various studios. Eric Kilburn at that point had launched Wellspring Sound, I think, in Concord. So I did some work there. I worked at Newbury Sound during recordings when it was alive on, that was on North Beacon, I think. If Ken hears this, he's going to kill me for not remembering. I can't even remember. I was trying to remember all the studios where I worked. There was a place called Hot Tracks. That was, I think, in Brighton. That was a Michael Blackmer room. Okay. But, so many places came and went so quickly that it's a hard business being in a recording studio. Yeah. And, the joke always was, how do you make a small fortune out of in the recording industry? Yeah. You start with a large fortune. Right. Because it's a labor of love. It's really not something unless you really know what you're doing and you've got the right client and you're in the right place. Of course. Yeah. It's really a struggle. Every day is a struggle. So, anybody who's hearing this, if you're ever giving a recording studio a hard time about how much money they're charging, shut the fuck up. Yeah. They deserve every penny they're getting. Doing freelance recordings was good, but it wasn't that steady. Right. And so I was always looking for fill-in work. And because I could do wiring, and you see I'm sitting in a lotus position here in this chair, I I could get into crazy positions and sit there for a long period of time back then. I started doing contract wiring work for a company nearby. And let's see, in couple of things happened around 1990. I got asked to do a month-long lockout at Bay Farm Sound Studio, and it was with a band then called The Story.
Yeah.
And so I worked on that. Leading up to that, I had done some contract work at here in Lowell at UMass.
Okay.
And they were rewiring one of the studios in UMass, the 24-track studio. And I was in the backs of those racks in crazy positions for a couple of weeks.
Yeah.
And the day we opened was one of those things where whenever you're finishing the last touches on getting a recording studio up and running, it doesn't matter. It's always down to the crunch time.
Yeah, of course.
And the last day is usually pretty much a straight through day.
Yeah.
So I remember going home, showering sometime in the morning, and then coming back. And I hadn't slept in probably 30 hours.
Right.
And I came back because they were having a reception to open the studio.
Right.
And I might have even been that day. Will Moylan, who was the chairman of the SRT program here at UMass, asked me if I had ever thought about teaching.
Yeah.
And he said, "Well, not really, but I'd be willing to entertain the idea." And so we talked about it. And as I said, I was always looking to try and fit things in to kind of. When you're only doing one thing, if there's a quiet period, you don't have anything else to fill in. Right. So I thought, if I have 2 or 3 things that help fill in the holes, then maybe I can make like a complete career out of this and bring in enough income that I can survive.
Right.
So I thought, I'll do this. I'll become an adjunct teacher here.
Yeah.
And so I taught the junior year lab course in the 8-track recording studio.
Oh, wow.
And so I'm still friends with a lot of my students.
Right.
Nick Zampiello, who at Alliance East.
Yeah.
He was one of my students.
Oh, wow.
Adam Ayen, who is up at works for Bob Ludwig up at Gateway.
Oh, wow.
Grammy award-winning guy. I mean, I have no I take no responsibility or credit for anything these guys have done. Mark Donahue, who is in JP at, I'm not going to remember the name of the place, but he's won Grammys for his classical recordings. Wow. I've worked with, taught these kids who went on to do some amazing things in the program. So I was there part-time for, I'd say, 6 or 8 years teaching there.
Yeah.
I went through that month-long recording project with The Story.
Right.
And then started teaching. And then at some point along there, there was another contract thing that came up of doing some wiring for studios at WHDH.
Oh, wow.
And it was back then it was a radio station. It was 850 WHDH. Right. It was bought by Channel 7,
right,
who was looking to change their image a little bit. So they bought WHDH, took on the call letters.
Yeah.
And I was there doing wiring in a broadcast environment for a long time. Huh. So when we finished that up, the chief engineer there wanted to hire me. So there were probably about 6 or 8 years where in the 90s where I was teaching a couple of days a week, and I was doing broadcast engineering for a couple of days a week, and I was doing recordings a couple of days a week.
Right.
And by that time, I was really fully independent as an engineer.
Yeah.
So I had a project. I remember this was probably after my daughter was born. She was born in 1993. She might have been maybe 1 or 1.5. And I had a project with a band called Knots and Crosses up in Maine.
Yeah. Like a folk.
Yeah, they were like Richard Thompson is probably their biggest influence, I would say.
Yeah.
But they really covered a lot of ground. Really wonderful musicians, great singing, songwriting.
Yeah.
So I would go up to Maine. We did the basic tracks of an album in the State Theater up in Portland.
Oh, wow.
And then we were doing overdubs on Peaks Island in their little cottage.
Oh, wow.
So I would go up there for 3 or 4 days.
Yeah.
And then I was also working on a project down in New York City as a freelance engineer. And I've been trying to remember the name of the band, and I just cannot remember the name of the band. But we went around from studio to studio. We did work at Axis. We did work at Sorcerer Sound.
Oh, wow.
We did work at... I'm not going to remember the name of it either. See, this is the trouble with that I have remembering stuff. We'll talk about it when I get to their timeline.
Yeah.
In terms of like, my memories aren't so good anymore. It was Donald Fagen's studio. I remember that. Wow. Is it River Sound? Maybe was Donald Fagen's studio?
Maybe.
But we did some work in Hoboken at Henry Hirsch was the guy who was the owner there. And it was where Lenny Kravitz did a lot of his work.
Oh, wow.
So, I was going down there for 3 or 4 days at a time.
Nice.
What ended up happening was I would come home from being gone, and, I'm trying to raise a family.
Yeah.
Just had the one daughter. Mm-hmm. I would come home. She wouldn't make eye contact with me.
Yeah.
It was heartbreaking to come
course.
home
Yeah.
and have your daughter not be able to look you in the face.
Yeah.
2 or 3 days later, everything would be fine again.
Right.
I'd teach for a couple of days and I'd do my broadcast engineering stuff, and then I'd take off and I'd leave for 3 or 4 days. And I'd come back and it repeated. And probably like the 5th or 6th time this happened, my then wife and I had a conversation like, I don't think I can do this anymore.
Right.
I don't want to raise my daughter and be a stranger to her.
Yeah, of course.
I can't do this.
Yeah.
And so I really made a conscious decision to trim back how much freelance travel work I was doing.
Right.
I still want to do recordings locally.
Yeah.
But the conversations I was having in New York City as an engineer were really positive.
Yeah.
I was the sessions we did at Axis. We were doing basic sessions, and I remember setting up a full drum kit in the little tiny studio room they had.
Right.
And the assistants were all wide-eyed. They had never seen an entire drum kit set up with mics all over it before, and someone actually getting a full drum kit sound.
Right.
I couldn't imagine that in New York City, major studio, and the kids who were assisting and helping me had never seen a full drum kit set up. Huh. So, it was interesting to go down there and work in these places. And as a work environment, it was wonderful.
Right.
But it was exhausting. Yeah. Totally exhausting because you just wake up in the morning, go to the studio until you can't see or hear anymore. You just you get blind. You're so tired.
Yeah.
Go home, sleep.
Yeah.
And turn over the next day. So I definitely remember driving home especially from New York City.
Yeah.
2:30, 3 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah.
Having all the windows open.
Yeah.
And singing at the top of my lungs to keep myself awake. Pouring water over my head in the driver's seat. And just trying to stay awake.
It's a long drive.
And sometimes just pulling off and just I'm going to nap for half an hour. In the late 90s, I stopped doing so much recordings, and I started doing more technical work.
Okay.
And I had a contact through teaching here at UMass, small company locally, didn't end up well. So I'm not going to talk about the company itself. But it was a small company, and I learned a lot, brought some things there, but I also learned a lot while I was there. Repair work, how to go about doing repair work, studying designs and how to do modifications and look at a design of a piece of equipment, something simple like a URI compressor or even the monitor section of a console, mix bus of a console, and what would you do to make it better?
Right.
Looking at the compromises that the designers had to do to sell the thing and get it out the door at a reasonable cost. What improvements could you make to make it sound better that would be worthwhile to do? And that's also where I learned to fix tape machines. Yeah. Because of, and we were talking about this before, the kind of mechanical aptitude that I figured out I had in high school. Yeah. And, I was fixing everybody's car in high school, because of that. I really picked up fixing tape machines, and somewhere along in the 90s, Tascam and Alesis both came out with the D88. It was the Hi8 based, 8-track tape machine.
Yep.
And Alesis came out with the ADAT, which was the SVHS 8-track.
Right.
And they were totally modular. You can string these things together and build as big a system as you want. So I trained at both Alesis and Tascam.
Yeah.
And for a long time, I was the guy here in the Boston area for doing warranty work and doing repairs. So if, in the late 90s and early 2000s, if you had an ADAT machine and a D88 and it got serviced, it was probably me who worked on them. I think there was one other guy, Dave Greenberg, I think was also here in town working on them at Bitco. But there was more work than the two of us could handle.
Yeah.
And I did a good job of working on them so that I had... one of the big issues with them was trying to maintain stability, because you're running a recording studio, you can't have a client show up on your tape machine so they don't work.
Yeah.
So I got studio owners on kind of like a service plan. So every 3 months you bring them in.
Yeah.
I'll set up a time, I'll set up a day, and I'll turn them around in 4 hours for you and get them back out the door for you.
Yeah.
And so, by doing a regular routine cleaning and alignment and maintenance, replacement of rubber parts and stuff like that, I really had a good client base of studios that really I kept running.
Nice.
So that place didn't work out that well. And I jumped to another small place here, and that was probably right in 2001. Because I remember I gave my notice at the first one, the day of the Patriots Super Bowl when the first one they won in 2001, I think it was.
Right.
So it was probably that, or maybe it was 2002. Crap, I don't remember the exact dates. But I remember changing. That was the day I gave notice, because I had to finish. On a Sunday, I had to finish talking to him and then get home so I could watch the Super Bowl. He was notoriously late for everything. That guy.
Right.
Anyway, so at the second place, and I'd really learned a lot about aligning tape machines and maintaining the mechanism and not just the playback calibration, but what really determines how the thing's going to sound, the record calibration, setting the bias and all the equalization adjustments that you can do in a tape machine. And so when I went to the kind of second local company that did repairs, and they did studio installs and sold all packages and stuff, I brought a lot to the table with them. And we worked on not just having me do a lot of the repairs, but I really developed like an upgrade and enhancement, we used to call it, business.
Yeah.
And so I developed a series of circuit boards that, if you had a Trident, a 70 series, and you wanted to have a balanced output stage, I had a little card that I had designed and laid out myself. Yeah. And then, we would stuff the components in it, screw it into the back, and run wires from the console to my card, and from my card to the connector on the back panel. And so that's really where I started doing a lot of upgrades to equipment.
Right.
While I was there, a couple of guys on the team, Dave Thibodeau and Brandon McHale. Dave Thibodeau is still here in the Boston area. He works a lot with Jeff Daking, and he also does some of the SSL repairs around the area, I think, still. We started developing a product, and it was a Neve-based of their the 1080 series. So it was a Neve mic preamp that was controlled by MIDI. So our goal was to develop a piece of equipment that, to Pro Tools, looked like one of the DigiDesign pre's.
Right.
So you could actually control our box from within Pro Tools, flipping phase and pan and power switches and gain up and down switches, or you could go to the front panel of our box and do it. But the circuitry inside was all vintage Neve. I went to Carnhill, who made transformers, they probably still do, for Neve. And I had them make me mic input transformers and line output transformers, the same transformers. I took a Neve 1084 and pretty much took it apart and analyzed the circuit and boiled it down to the basics of the mic preamp, and then laid out the whole thing, controlled by, they were analog switches controlled by, by logic.
Right.
And so the whole thing essentially was technically an analog circuit controlled by digital. And, there were some issues with it, but it really sounded pretty great.
Yeah.
We built about 8 of them.
Yeah.
Before it was clear that it wasn't going to make it financially.
Right.
But I think there are probably still some of them out there working.
Yeah. So with this kind of stuff that you just, this was all just experience from working with all of this stuff over years, and
yeah.
Where did that drive, you think, come from? You talked about early on you were able to fix a car in 2 months and rebuild an engine.
Yeah, it's a good question. I taught myself electronics.
Yeah.
We had a basic theory of electricity class in college, but because I was doing mechanical engineering, we didn't really talk about
the guts and
exactly, and especially at a place like Brown, it was very theoretical.
Right.
I didn't do any hands-on electricity stuff at all.
Right.
So, I had a pretty big library of books that I bought and read and went through about op-amp circuit design, and I did some work with tubes, but really I focused on solid state as far as doing design work, and I bought a lot of magazines, hobbyist magazines, about doing performance upgrades to things, and a lot of the stuff was based in tubes and Class A circuit design,
right.
And some of it was about op amps. Walt Young was a very famous circuit designer, and I bought a couple of his books, and you'd look at his optimal circuit designs against what a company had done in their equipment,
right.
and you just see these glaring differences. And so you do one channel's worth of changes,
right.
and listen and do some distortion and noise measurements and see you can make some dramatic improvements in this stuff.
Right.
And I think I was excited to improve the quality of recordings, improve my own equipment that I owned, and also try and make customers happy and earn some money by doing it.
Right.
So I guess I'm a person that when I get excited about something like that, I just dive completely into it. And so when I was in the studio, I was reading electronics books.
Yeah. Now, were you, because you still have that camera that your dad got you in 1950. Yeah. Were you still doing photography throughout all this stuff?
No, I really didn't have any time to do that. It probably was, let's see. So in 2006, I'd had enough of the second small company that I worked for here doing repairs.
Right.
And it was probably in April or May I gave my notice there.
Right.
And I had met some pretty, good clients working there.
Yeah.
And I had an agreement with that company that I wouldn't poach clients.
Right. Yeah. Afterwards.
I did reach out and let them know I was no longer with that company.
Yeah.
And if they chose to call me, that was fine.
Yeah.
But there were a couple of clients in particular that I out of respect for that company, I said, you know what, I'm just not going to call them.
Yeah.
So I spent the summer working for myself, and this was in 2006, working for myself, and I was doing 60 and 70-hour weeks working for myself. There were a lot of people that I hadn't spoken with in 5 or 6 years.
Right.
That when I reached out to them and said I'm on my own again, they said, I am so glad you're not working there anymore because I couldn't call you because I didn't like the guy who owns it.
Right.
And it's fine.
Yeah.
And so I had a summer's worth of I was just flat out doing repairs.
Nice.
At my house, I was doing service work in studios. I was going everywhere.
Yeah.
But I could see already that it was a roller coaster.
Yeah.
And I really wanted stability.
Yeah.
So I started looking around. I had a headhunter call me about a job at Analog Devices as an applications engineer.
Okay.
And I didn't know a lot about what that entailed.
Right.
But I did look into what what it was, and it
Yeah.
was the digital audio group.
Okay.
And I knew very little about digital
Yeah.
audio. I was an analog guy.
Yeah.
But I had good soldering skills.
Yeah.
At that point, having taken so many D88s and ADAT machines apart, I was able to do surface mount, replacement of components, especially these big flat pack ICs, that most people needed to use fancy equipment with.
Yeah.
I got good enough that I could just take them off with a simple heat gun and swap parts.
Yeah.
So I had a couple of interviews at Analog Devices before they decided they were going to take a chance on me, because I didn't have my EE
Right.
and I didn't have a lot of experience in that specific field.
Right.
But I started working there in the fall of 2006. And like everything else, that I've done, I focused really hard on learning
Right.
and picking stuff up.
Yeah.
And having come from the music industry, especially the studio industry, where you just can't ever sit down.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
You'd work a 12-hour day
Yeah.
and take maybe 2 breaks, half-hour breaks,
Yeah.
and you were just flat out.
Yeah.
And so, I went into an 8-hour day and I was working like I usually did.
Right.
And my boss was like, you don't really have to work at that pace if you don't want.
Right.
It's okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
I was like, this is just how I am because of working in the studios for so long.
Yeah.
So that was a good kind of way for me to take a step back and work in a corporate environment and see something totally different.
Right.
Not worry about money coming in and a regular paycheck.
Yeah. Yeah.
I had proper benefits.
Yeah.
And
nice, isn't it?
vacation time is, of course, it's like, wow, revelation. I've got a family and we need to go away someplace and I can actually do that.
Yeah.
But I was still doing recording studio stuff on the side.
Yeah.
And around I would say 2011, when I took my daughter to college, I was pretty exhausted because I was doing schematics, circuit board layout during the day at work, and I was also doing a lot of lab work. I was swapping parts and running tests and doing technical stuff at work. And I'd come home and I had equipment piled up on my desk at home.
Right.
So I was kind of like seeing stars of seeing soldering irons in my sleep.
Right.
And I needed to really think about changing what I was doing.
Right.
I moved here to Lowell. In 2012, I met Margarita, but I was still doing. I had a couple of big clients I was taking care of.
Yeah.
I had in New York City. I had through contacts and because of my own kind of technical abilities, I landed Alicia Keys Studios as basically that was one of my clients.
Nice.
So I would go down once a month, and I did the transition from Oven Studios that was on Long Island to their place right in downtown Manhattan.
Oh, wow.
And I there were many years where I just went down there once a month.
Yeah.
And I would do a long day. I would drive down in the morning on a Saturday, and I would do a long day of tech work and just maintenance and stuff. Most everything at some point was pretty straightforward because I went there regularly.
Right.
So it was there were some RF issues I had to kind of solve in some of the microphones they had.
Right.
And I had because of Paul Caruso, who I spoke about earlier, he was very good friends with Joe Perry.
Oh, right.
And so I did some work at Joe Perry's studio in his house.
Yeah.
But at some point, I was involved with an installation of a studio in Aerosmith's management company in Hanover.
Okay.
And it was, what year was it? Probably 2012 or 13.
Mm-hmm.
They started ramping up to do a record, and Paul called me and said, we've got Jack Douglas coming in next month, and we want to get the analog tape machines up and running, and there are a lot of bugs in the studio, and you're the guy we want to have come work on it.
Oh, wow.
So there were probably a month and a half or 2 months where I was at work during the day in Wilmington,
Right.
and I drove to Hanover, and I would, at rush hour,
Right,
and I would spend 4 or 5, 6 hours in Hanover.
Oh, wow.
and then I would drive home and pass out.
So they were recording analog.
Yeah.
Wow.
It was what they were doing actually was I met a guy named Chris Estes who has a company. Crap, what is the name of the company? The equipment that he developed was called Clasp.
Okay.
And it was a Pro Tools interface that allowed the audio live while they're tracking to go through the Pro Tools box. No, how was the signal path? It definitely went around a monitoring system inside the Clasp box, ended up on the analog tape machine, on the record head, and immediately went from the play head directly into Pro Tools.
Oh, wow.
So it was essentially a live bounce
Right.
that was it's invisible in the recording process.
Yeah.
And the Clasp software interfaced with Pro Tools would even, it started, if it knew it was getting close to the end of the reel,
Right.
it would have a flag for the engineer to say, you probably need to take a break while we rewind.
Huh.
So I was in charge of making sure the tape machines were acting well, but also any other little signal issues that were showing up around the studio.
Yeah.
Whether it was some of the headphone system issues, or
Right.
we had developed a console. It was a Frankenstein console.
Yeah.
It was based around Neve console, but there was See, it's been so long. It was mostly Focusrite, but it had an API center section, and it had a series of Neve. They were the later series of Neve mic pre's, the whole mic module, EQ module.
Right.
And, the team of me and Dave Thibodeau and Brandon McHale essentially put this whole thing together as a Frankenstein console. Huh. And there were a lot of issues that would crop up during sessions. So you had to kind of know where to bang on the thing to get it working. And then I was really doing so much tech work. I worked at Mad Oak. I worked at, doing freelance work. Notable productions in Watertown. Dan Cantor, he's a great friend of mine for years and years. I did a lot of tech work. I've rewired his studio a couple of times. I can't think of all the countless studios around town that I've done freelance work for.
Yeah.
In 2014 was the big turning point.
Yeah.
When I didn't have tech work to do, I would bicycle to work.
Okay.
And on June 11th, 2014, I was bicycling to work in the morning.
In the city.
It was actually right near Wilmington, where I used to work.
Okay.
And I had an interaction with a school bus.
Okay.
And some people who are listening to this know the story, but I was playing kind of leapfrog with the school bus. What time is it? We've been going for a while now.
Yeah. No, that's fine.
I was playing leapfrog with the school bus. She would put her stop flags out, and I would stop.
Right.
Behind her,
Yeah.
and she'd put her flags in, and because I was a bike, I could get going quicker, and I would pull up next to her, and then she would get away from me, and at some point I was next to her, and she took a spontaneous right turn that I wasn't expecting, and took me with her around the curb, and I fell, and she literally ran me over.
Right.
And so it crushed my pelvis and tore up my insides. And they put me on a helicopter and took me down to Brigham and Women's and pieced me back together again.
Yeah.
And so I was out of commission for about 6 months. And, of course, stopped doing everything.
Right.
Tech work, everything. I was really home here. I was in the hospital for about a month and was home recuperating for 5 more months. And then in January of 2015, after various reconstruction surgeries, I tried to go back to work. Right. And I would say back in 2010 or 11, I'd started shooting photos and doing fine art photography. It's probably around the time I started at Analog Devices. Okay. One of my friends at work was taking a course in black and white photography. And, my daughter was growing up, and I had done a bunch of photos of her with a digital camera, and it didn't really excite me, but it was a record of her growing up.
Yeah, of course.
And I had done some film photos of her using the Ikaflex, but it was random kind of thing here and there. But when I saw the black and white photos of a friend of mine at Analog, something clicked with me, and I thought, that's right. That's a look that I really like.
Right.
And it was probably within a week or two, I got out the Ikaflex and I bought a roll of black and white film. At that point, I was living in Newton, right near Newtonville Camera.
Okay, yeah.
And when I would bicycle to work, I rode right past Newtonville Camera.
Yeah.
So, I would shoot a roll of film in the Ikaflex, and I would drop it off a Newtonville Camera on the way to, into work. I'd just stick it in the slot, the mail slot. Yeah. And then on the way home, they would still be open, and I'd pick up the film, and they would have scans for me.
Nice.
And it really sparked something in me creatively.
Yeah, yeah.
I think I'd been doing technical work so much, and there's some creativity in doing circuit design and trying to figure out, well, how can I make a console better, or what can I do to this compressor to make it sound and react better? But there's something about that creative thing where you don't have anybody telling you what to do.
Yeah, of course.
And I remember doing projects. I started investing in cameras and getting some film cameras. I bought a Holga, which is a plastic medium format film camera.
Okay.
It's like a cheapo, piece of junk camera, plastic lens. Mm-hmm. I would put a roll of film in that camera and wear it around my neck while I was riding to work.
Okay.
And I wouldn't hold it up to my face and look through a viewfinder or anything, of course, because I'm riding. Yeah. But I would kind of point it at things and release the shutter. Okay. And sometimes I would have it in timed mode, and I forget what the shutter speed is, like a 60th or 125th of a second. It's like a spring-loaded thing, so there's nothing exact about it. Yeah. And so I might do 4 and 5 shutter releases on the same piece, on the same frame. Yeah. Or sometimes I'd put it in bulb mode where I could just hold it open as long as I wanted to. Yeah. And most every roll of film I had processed had something really interesting on it. Somewhere along in there, I bought a tank and started doing chemicals and started processing my own film. Mm-hmm. And then I bought a film scanner. Right. You can see them behind me sitting here. I've got a couple of them. Yeah. And I started scanning my own film and really enjoying the process of doing something creative. Mm. And a couple of friends of mine said, you really should think about, putting this in a gallery or in a show, or, I was in Newton, and the Newton Art Association was really open to anybody and who wanted to present and hang artwork. So I started doing artwork there. Yeah. And a friend of mine, Pete Weiss, who owns Verdant up in Vermont, he was playing a show with the band that he's in.
The Weisternauts.
The Weisternauts, exactly. Right. Yeah. And it was at a club down in Canton, I think. Mm-hmm. And at that point, I had a big medium format camera, studio camera. Yeah. And I took a couple of rolls of film, and I went down and I shot that show, came home, processed the film, scanned it. And I think at that point, Facebook was happening. And so I, posted these things on Facebook. Right. And they came out pretty well. Yeah. And I think one of those shots ended up as the inside cover for one of the Weisternauts records. Oh, yeah. If there's a black and white, live shot of them, the whole band, that's yours, my photo. Okay. It really sparked, wow, I can take the music business that I've been in for so many years. Right. And photography that I've loved since I was 16, and I can put these two things together. Yeah. And I would go to a show with a couple rolls of film and shoot some photos. Yeah. And a couple of friends asked me if I would show up and shoot photos, and it kind of snowballed. Right. It's expensive shooting film. Yeah. It gets expensive fast shooting film and processing it. Mm-hmm. So I started using digital cameras, but I really wasn't very happy with them. Right. And I would say the first camera that I was really happy with was about maybe 4 or 5 years ago. When I really wanted to get into a nice digital camera, I went to Newtonville Camera, and I talked about what I wanted to do.
Yeah.
I wanted to buy a nice DSLR. Mm-hmm. What should I get?
Right.
And he put a couple of camera bodies on the counter in front of me. He put a Nikon in front of me, and he put a Canon in front of me.
Yeah.
And I never really heard of Sony doing
Right.
cameras, but he put a Sony camera in front of me.
Yeah.
He said, close your eyes and pick up each of these 3 cameras and tell me which one you like best.
Yeah.
And I picked each of the 3 bodies up, and the Sony felt right in my hand.
Oh, yeah?
And I said, so this is the one I should get. He said, well, you're going to be holding on to this camera for hours.
Right.
And if it's not comfortable in your hand,
Yeah.
you're not gonna be happy.
Yeah, of course.
They're all very similar to each other in
Right.
terms of specs and features.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd recommend you get the Sony.
Yeah.
And so I bought the Sony. Was their 100 model. And soon after, Zeiss actually started coming out with lenses for this camera. The Alpha 100 was the Alpha mount.
Okay.
And it turns out it actually was the same autofocus mount as the last of the Minolta and Maxim cameras, the Pro cameras, 35 millimeter cameras
Right.
that were out. So I ended up buying a nice Maxim 7 film camera
Right.
body. And I had the Sony A100, and then gradually I upgraded cameras, but I was never really happy shooting live with any cameras until I bought the A99.
Yeah.
And that was a huge landmark for Sony coming out with that camera.
Yeah.
The noise was so much more under control. I could run the ISO up at a much higher level,
Okay.
and get really good results
For live music.
for shooting live work.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Since then, I've wanted to pare down the weight.
Right.
And a few years ago, they came out with the A7R series, and so I've essentially sold off my. I had 2 different A99 bodies and a whole series of Zeiss lenses for the Sony series, and I've bought an A7R and an adapter mount.
Right.
And a few Leica lenses. And they're tiny, but they're some of the best lenses in the world.
Right.
And so the Summilux series of lenses, they go down to f1.4, so they're wide open as anything. They look nice and sharp all the way out to the corners.
Right.
They're small, they're light. So I don't have a 15-pound bag hanging on my shoulder all night. I've got maybe like an 8 or 9-pound bag hanging on my shoulder all night.
Yeah.
And it's an investment in lenses and a camera body, but because I could sell that whole other system, it basically was a pretty even exchange in terms of what. And the Sony A7R, it's pretty darn nice.
Yeah.
Even if I'm doing fine art photography, I do still love the process of shooting on film.
Yeah.
But I don't find that if I'm out and I have my digital, if I've got my A7 with me with my Leica kit, that I really do like the results I get.
Yeah. Yeah.
So now I'm happy with both. But you still can't get some of the pinhole cameras that I have.
Yeah.
You can't get. There's nothing
Right.
in digital land that's going to touch.
Yeah, right.
A 4x5 piece of film processed with chemicals with pinhole, and it looks like nothing else does.
Right. Yeah.
I just love that.
Nice. And so, what do you with photography? Do you enjoy the fine art stuff more than the live stuff, or obviously you approach them differently?
I think not as differently as you might think.
Yeah.
When I'm shooting live, I'd really try and think about it as a piece of artwork. I really focus on composition.
Yeah.
And thinking about how am I going to set up a shot that everything looks interesting to me.
Right.
And get people and interactions between people that fill the frame, and whether it's lighting and with 2 people in the shot, or a group, or even one person with their instrument, trying to capture something that really is interesting. So I'll get something, and I think of it as how I did when I do street photography. You'll find a spot where you think something interesting might happen.
Right.
And the composition looks good.
Right.
And I'll get some framing set up, and I'll just have to wait.
Right.
And when I'm shooting, I don't really ever look at what I'm doing while I'm doing it.
Yeah.
In other words, if I release a shutter,
Right.
I don't look at what I just shot.
Right. Right.
Because there's all kinds of stuff that's still going on
Still
in front of me.
going on, yeah.
So, I've got all the preview stuff all turned off. So I
Yeah.
approach it as though I'm shooting
Oh, right.
film.
Yeah.
So I don't know.
Right.
If I take a break in the middle of a set because I
Right.
need to sit down and
You
rest
may
my
look at 'em.
legs and go off in the corner and take a break for a song or two, then I might look.
Right.
But
Right.
if I'm up and I've got my camera in my hands,
Yeah.
I'm not looking at what I'm
Right.
shooting. I'm looking at the action on the stage.
Right.
And I think that's one of the things that I see so many photographers, in front of the set, in front of the stage. They take one or two images
And then
they'll look at the back of their camera.
Right.
It's like, you just missed it.
Right.
You just missed it. You just
Yeah.
missed it.
Yeah, yeah.
So it's an interesting, thing, approaching it as a film, kind of from a film background,
Right. Yeah.
and trusting my own self.
Right.
That, did I get it?
Yeah.
Well, I don't know, but if I didn't get that exact thing,
Right.
there's going to be something else
Yeah.
coming up that I'm going to grab too.
Right.
So usually my process is if the set's about to start, most bands will have something exciting in the first half of the first song,
Right.
something interesting, coordinated. They all jump,
Right.
or they do something together to start the set.
Yep.
But then I'll take a step back and watch the dynamic of the band itself and see how do they line up on stage, where can I go to get an interesting angle,
Yeah.
and try and set myself up in a
Right.
spot, and take some photos,
Right.
and then move to a different place. So
Right.
I'm a person who moves around a lot,
Yeah.
and that's so I can get different angles, but it's also so I'm not dominating the space
Right.
for the audience.
Yeah,
I don't want
yeah.
to be in anybody's way.
Yeah, of course. Well, I think that's a testament to your photographies, the live stuff that I've seen and looked at. You feel like you're at the show, and I think that's something that's lost. And that was one of the questions I had sort of sent you was, in an era where everyone's taking, there's thousands of pictures from every concert.
Yeah.
I think it's very important for people that are, truly into music and art and that kind of thing, is to look at your stuff and other photographers. Because,
I take that as high praise. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, because
Yeah.
I think you, like you just said, you work on it. So, and that's missed because, when I was younger, you looked at all those pictures of, live artists in the back of, and there wasn't 800 angles of that. There was just that one picture of Iggy Pop with the,
Right.
on the, at the.
Well, a lot of it is, I think, there is a composition element to it where you try and find the right place and get things lined up the way you want.
Yeah.
But then there's also a timing element.
Mm-hmm.
I run the camera completely in manual.
Yeah.
I'm manual focus
Yeah.
and completely manual exposure.
Mm-hmm.
I can see the meter in the bottom of my
Right.
frame,
Yeah.
but I don't leave it in aperture mode.
Yeah.
So when I see something, it might be on the beat,
Yeah.
and I need to release the shutter exactly when I want to release
yeah.
the shutter.
Yeah,
so
of
I don't
course.
wait for autofocus.
Yeah.
And I don't wait for the exposure adjustment.
Right.
It goes
You
when I
just
says
pre-
it to
yeah.
go. So there really is no waiting.
Yeah.
And I think that's a significant difference,
Yeah.
with some people who, you see, because I'll sometimes see the flash of an
Oh, yeah.
autofocus on somebody's face,
Right.
and it's like,
Yes.
they missed that timing,
Right. Yeah,
so
yeah.
I think that's it requires a lot of brain power. And
Yeah.
I was at a show maybe a month ago, and one of my friends said, "I don't know how you do it. It's exhausting shooting live."
Yeah.
And, and we were talking about on the side, she does a lot of studio work, and she does beautiful studio work. It's Jenny Bergman from Secret Bureau Design.
Okay.
Secret Bureau. I forget the name of her
Right.
place. And she's like, I can shoot studio stuff all day long, and I can focus on the image, and I don't think about the technical stuff. But as soon as I start doing live, it's like I get overwhelmed.
Right.
And I'm the exact opposite.
Yeah.
I can have those 4 or 5 adjustments, and I don't think about adjusting
Right.
aperture and speed and even the ISO sometimes and focus. I just have them all at my fingertips,
Right.
and I'm just doing it.
Yep.
When after that conversation, I started thinking about it,
Right.
and it took me like half a show to forget about it again,
Right.
because I was suddenly really conscious of like, you know, when you think about walking, you can't walk.
Oh, yeah.
You know, it's an interesting thing. So.
Yeah. And you shoot a lot of different genres of music. And then the last show I saw you at, well, probably it was you. I met you briefly for a second.
Oh yeah. We shook hands on the ramp at Middle East. Yeah. At the Boston Massacre 2018.
I did some serious damage to my hearing that night 'cause I didn't have earplugs in.
Yeah,
and,
see, I always carry, if you ever need earplugs and you see me at a show, and this isn't just for you, Christian, but for anybody, I always have a little box of brand new earplugs. So if anybody ever needs earplugs, I have them in because I'll be standing in front of a stack for 5 minutes.
Yeah, I was on that side platform, 12 inches from that thing.
Yep.
I ended up putting like a piece of cardboard in there because it was. But when I left the Middle East and started once I got away from like talking and just the sound of the city and was walking through Central to my car, the hiss in my ears,
the ringing.
Was and then I got in the car and I the beep usually goes off in your car and it was a completely different tone and I was like, oh shit.
Yeah.
I put HRB on. There was some jazz music playing and it was all distorted.
Oh,
so
boy.
I was legitimately scared. And then the next day it went away.
Yeah.
But that was, but anyway, so shooting those kind of shows where there's a lot of people flying over you. And
that was an interesting thing that night because of my injuries. I have to be careful.
Yeah, that was one of the things I was going to ask. Does that ever...
It does, and I hit the deck once that night.
Yeah.
And I fell on my butt,
but
I held my camera up. And my bag is nicely padded, so nothing got damaged.
Yeah.
And as soon as I hit the deck, people grabbed me by the shoulders and the arms and stood me back up again.
Yeah.
And the guy who was crawling all over us and doing the stage driving came up to me afterwards and shook my hand and apologized. Nice. And he was a real good guy. I've got some great shots of him like about to dive back into. But. I when I'm shooting, I forget about that stuff if I can and just dive in.
Yeah.
What I tried to do that night, especially because the mosh was particularly violent that night, I got myself up against the stage.
Yeah.
And it's a steadying thing for me to be up against the stage.
Yeah.
And it really helped me stabilize my legs. And,
Yeah.
and at one point, I really felt a push, and I felt uncomfortable about the corner of the stage against my legs.
Right.
So I just literally sat up on the stage.
Yeah.
And I was looking back at the audience, and I looked down at my camera, I got my focus and all my settings where I wanted them, and I wasn't even really looking at framing. I was just holding, I had a fisheye on at that point.
Right.
And I was just holding the camera up over the crowd and trying to capture and doing timing stuff. I could see what was happening, but I was hoping I was getting stuff framed okay because it was a 15 millimeter lens.
Right.
I knew I was getting a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
But that was a wild night.
Yeah.
The Jerry's Kids set was when really there was so much stage diving going on. And then during Moving Targets, Kenny himself was going out in the audience.
Yeah, he jumped
and
out.
Eve was doing that too.
Yeah. And then there was just a million people on stage. The bull of
at that point, I the last set, the security people had laxed a little bit. And so I tiptoed up behind the monitor console.
Yeah.
And the dude who was running the monitor, he was fine. He didn't. I wasn't making any noise or causing trouble. So he let me stand there for a while.
Yeah.
And the security person who was kind of next to the console, he and I make eye contact, and he thought it was okay. I was there.
Yeah.
And but that was a crazy night. I still have sets to go through. I think I haven't touched the Straw Dog set.
Okay.
And I've gotten most of Mung chosen, but I'm still going through. And this is something you touched on earlier.
Yeah.
I might come out of a set with a couple of hundred photos.
Right.
And I try not to shoot so many photos.
Right.
But there's so much interesting stuff for me usually that.
Yeah.
And I don't shoot in burst. This is all like 1 and 2 photos at a time.
Yeah.
I come home and I really try and pare down and get rid of stuff. And then once I've chosen what photos I like, I process them and I crop them.
Right.
So that it really is every photo's been kind of selected and
Right.
worked on
And
somewhat.
touched. Yeah.
If I'm working in black and white, because either the colors are distracting, whether it's the clothing someone's wearing,
Right.
or it just seems more appropriate to have it in black and white.
Right.
I do play around with, even if it's in black and white, you can still, I use Adobe Lightroom to do my editing.
Right.
You can still play around underneath with the color balance.
Oh yeah.
And you can make huge changes in
Yeah.
how a
How something
photograph
looks.
look by playing with the color temperature and
Yeah.
with the tint as well. And then you can even go in and play with individual colors that are in the color photo.
Oh, wow.
And that it's similar to putting like a color filter on a black and white film photo. If you put a red filter on a camera
Yeah.
and go out and shoot nature and you can see the sky.
Yeah.
The sky is really dark.
Yeah.
It's almost like a black color
Right.
in the black and white photo.
Yeah.
And so you can go into a digital photo that you've flipped the black and white switch and
Right.
still adjust all the colors underneath.
Yeah.
And so you can make big tonal changes in the black and white photo.
Nice.
So I think I don't consciously try and make my work
Right.
stand out or
Right.
different from anybody else's. I just do what I see in my head.
Yeah.
And if it stands out, it stands out. If it doesn't, it doesn't. I don't, I can't really compare my work to other people's because
Right.
then I've totally lost,
Yeah. Of course.
what comes from
you're
inside
doing.
me.
Yeah. And I know it. And when I see him on Facebook or just on social media, I immediately know it's one of yours usually before I even see.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah, I can
I
tell.
do have the watermark in the corner.
Yeah. I mean, that too. But yeah. But I
But,
can usually
some people use them as their profile photos, which is fine.
Right.
If you use my profile photo, all I do is that you let me know and you tag me.
Yeah, of course.
That's fine.
Yeah.
But, a lot of times they get cut off because
people
if, our cameras shoot in 2 to 3 perspective.
Right.
And I will when I crop, I try and keep things to a classic perspective, whether it's 5x7 or 4x5 or square. So if I'm going to do any enlargement later, at least
Right.
the photo itself will line up with a classic.
Correct. Yeah.
A classic piece of paper.
Yeah.
But most of the time, my watermark gets cut off when people
Right.
use them for their profile photos.
Yeah.
But I'm totally complimented on that when people do. It's great.
Yeah. And you've started putting this photography out there in the world as of how long have you been doing that?
Oh, I would say I got a Facebook account probably in 2010 or 11, and
Yeah.
it was probably 2012, 11 or 12 that I started doing that.
Yeah.
I've changed how I approach doing that.
Yeah.
In the last maybe 2 years, I've really started developing a series of hashtags that I use.
Yeah.
So I use hashtags based on the band, the club.
Yeah.
If there's a booking agent or
Yeah.
promoter, I usually will
Nice.
use hashtag for them.
Yeah.
I've got them for myself.
Yeah.
Here in Lowell, I have a series that just tag Lowell.
Yeah.
One of the local guys here, Eddie Dyer, is such a great singer-songwriter. But he always says, "I'm from fucking Lowell." So when I put his photos up, there's a hashtag, "I'm from fucking Lowell."
Oh, nice.
That I put on his.
Yeah, of course.
Because
Yeah.
that's his hashtag.
Yeah.
But I've gone from waiting until I have the entire album edited and putting it up to when I come home from a show, I'm usually wired.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I come home, I'll take the memory card out of my camera and the battery out, stick the battery in the charger,
Yeah.
and I'll come to my office and stick the memory card in the computer and start transferring.
Yeah.
Go grab a snack.
Yeah.
And then when it's done, I usually will go through, if I've got the energy, I'll go through and pick out one photo from each
Right.
set.
Okay.
And it might be, if it's good, of the whole band,
Yeah.
I'll post one photo from each set of that night.
Yeah.
And I usually will share them myself and share them in the event.
Right.
And then hopefully in the next couple of days, I'll go through and find maybe 6 or 8 photos
Yeah.
that look like they're really strong.
Yeah. Yeah.
Process them, crop them,
Right.
and then put them up as a small album. And that's I've been doing that maybe in the last 3 months.
Okay, yeah.
And that's been getting it's been getting me a lot of attention.
Yeah.
By putting up 5 and 6 photos and sharing them myself, and then putting that in the event and tagging members of the band, and so I've got a document that's all of the hashtags and band members of everybody I've shot since I started doing it. It's a big document.
Yeah, hashtags are I don't think people realize the importance of them, and I need to utilize them more with this podcast, because I try to hit everything with
I think people don't use them specifically, but if someone's doing a search for the name of a band,
right,
my hashtags will show up.
Yeah.
Or if someone searches for that band using the hashtags, all my photos will show up.
Yeah.
And I really use Facebook for that, because Twitter and Instagram, they aren't really set up for doing multiple photos as much.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, now Instagram, you can kind of page to the left and right and see a few photos. But I just haven't gotten into the routine of doing that.
Yeah.
It's more difficult. I'm really laptop, but desktop based
right.
in terms of my posting.
Yeah.
And it was always a rigmarole to try and get my photos stored in a place that I could get to from my phone to post them on Instagram. So it was like, why should I do 5 steps to post them on Instagram when most of the people I tag on Facebook download them and they tag them, they put them on Instagram for me. So, maybe I'll work that into my flow at some point, but right now that's kind of how my flow goes.
Nice. Yeah, so to sort of wind down, if people did want to see your stuff, you have a website.
I do have a website, but I don't really post much there because it's not as immediate. ColemanRogers.com is my website, but it's really my Coleman Rogers Photography Facebook page that has.
Page seems to be.
If you want to find an album of any of the bands that I've shot, they're all there, going back 5-6 years probably.
Yeah, there's a ton of stuff.
Oh my God, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, sometimes if I'm trying to find somebody, and I just want to scroll through and find it. It's like, wow, I forgot I did that set. But most of the time I'll share them myself.
Yeah.
And I do share them a lot in, like, there's a Boston Rock and Roll Photography Facebook page.
Oh yeah. Okay.
It's a group that I share into. I always share them on, like, the club's. When I finish a whole album, I'll share them on the club's Facebook page, on the band's Facebook page. Mm-hmm. I tag individuals, so it's they're difficult to miss.
Yeah.
I probably drive people crazy, but that's all right. No one tells me to stop, so that's okay.
And then physical prints. You just showed me some stuff here.
I do some if people want to order prints, and I do have, for every couple of weeks, someone will say, hey, I'd love to buy a print from you of that band. There's this one shot I really like.
Right.
They can just contact me, send me a Facebook message and ask. There's no real place or store that I have set up online.
Right. Yeah.
I did that at one point with a Square. I did a Squarespace store.
Oh yeah.
And I publicized it. I thought I publicized it well, but no one really bought anything from it. So I do, if someone wants to buy a photo of a band, I do give a royalty to the band itself, even if it's a couple bucks.
Yeah.
It's like, it's the band.
It's their art too. Yeah.
I have sold some large ones, like the one I have at the Arts League now of Kenny.
Yeah.
That you saw. It's a Kenny crowd surfing at the Middle East.
Right.
It's 3 feet by 4 feet. It's big.
It's a nice shot.
Thanks. And it's $175.
Yeah.
If it sells, I'll give him $10 or whatever the 5% of that would be.
Yeah.
As a royalty.
Nice.
So I got to pay back people.
Yeah.
Even if it's peanuts, it's the sentiment.
Yeah. Well, awesome. I definitely appreciate you doing this, and you definitely embody passion with starting back with talking about all this technical stuff. So it's great to hear that you.
And if you need to cut a lot of that out, it was
no. It's fine. Okay. No, I think it's great.
We've gone for a long time, maybe longer than people expected.
That's perfect.
That's
man.
good. I mean, I'm happy to that. People who've only met me maybe in the last 3 or 4 years because of my photography don't know the history of the music that I worked on over the years.
Yeah, I didn't realize.
Bands that I work with. I mentioned Knots and Crosses, but there was a band called The Great Divide years ago. That was a really great band. Jimmy Worcester and Kevin Connolly were the main guys in that band. They were wonderful. I'm blanking. The whole one of the side effects of the accident that I'm left over with is a lot of chronic pain that I have, and I deal with that on a day-to-day basis.
Right.
And it really does affect my ability to remember stuff.
Yeah.
And luckily, when I'm shooting photos, I mostly forget about all that.
Yeah.
So.
And this, you think the photography has helped heal?
Yeah, I think if I didn't go out and shoot photos, the only time I would leave the house would be to go to the gym and go to doctor's appointments.
Yeah.
So it gets me out of the house, and it's a social thing where I get to go see people and hang out in an environment, even if it's loud and I can't talk to people too much. One of the things that's coming up that I do want to mention. At Once Somerville, Once Ballroom on September 16th it's a Sunday. There is a street festival going on in front of Once, but there are going to be about 20 Boston music photographers displaying work for the day. It's only a one-day show. So there are going to be some wonderful photos there. So I want to plug that. There's an event on Facebook you can go find. It's called Local Focus. And there's been so much response to it that if it goes well that day, we'll probably do other ones with maybe different photographers because there's so many great photographers in the Boston area. I don't even want to start listing them because I will leave somebody out.
Of course.
I was honored 2016 to be a Boston Music Award nominee.
That's awesome.
And it was a really wonderful thing to get nominated. That was a nice kind of recognition of my work.
And so for a lot of these, most of these podcasts are very music. And we didn't really even talk about music at all.
No, not really.
Which is fine. And a lot of them.
Well, you said I shoot.
Yeah.
I shoot all kinds of music.
Yeah. Who are some of your favorite people just to that you like? When I walked downstairs, I saw you had a lot of Dylan CDs, and I'm a big fan. So But who are some of your
in terms of
favorites?
listening to music?
Yeah.
Oh, my musical taste is very, very broad.
Yeah. I assumed that.
I think a lot of it is rooted in the mid 80s, and a little earlier. XTC, King Crimson, The Clash. Some of the classic bands from then. But certainly over the years, I gravitate towards music that it's passionate, like I am, and sincere, and has heart and a message that resonates with me. So whether it's Rage Against the Machine, Nirvana, I'm trying to think of some other non-hard-edged music that's current that I'm just blanking on.
I know.
On music that I but there are so many great local bands here.
Oh, I know, right.
Parlor Bells is great. Worshipper. And again, I'm going to leave guys out, so please, it's my memory going that I can't remember everybody. But even here in Lowell, this is an intense music scene here. There are so many original bands here in Lowell that play it, whether it's Uncharted or Thirsty First or Warp and Weft, which is right downstairs here. There's so much great music in the Boston area and Lowell that it's just unbelievable.
I know it's
we're spoiled. We really are spoiled here.
Definitely.
That people complain about the Boston music scene, but you go to other cities that are comparable size, and they are not going to have the same kind of original music scene.
And you could see a metal show tonight, or you could see a indie rock show tonight. You could see
absolutely.
Week here.
Folk music,
and there'll be people there. And,
it's crazy. It's just crazy.
Cool. Well, thanks again, man.
You're welcome. It was my pleasure, and I appreciate you asking me. Like I said, it was a big compliment for me too.
No problem, man. All right. Thanks.